campers. Heidi-hi! Heidi-ho! Oh.
On the morning of the 6th of June, 1944, a 22-year-old signalman from Berkshire was aboard a landing craft heading for the Normandy beaches when the craft was hit and went down under him. He was pulled out of the water alive. He spent his recovery being nursed by nuns in a French convent, and a little while after that he was taken to a Vera Lynn concert, where the Force's sweetheart herself gave him an impromptu singing lesson. 36 years later, you sat in your front room on a winter evening and watched that same man shuffle round a holiday camp in riding boots, playing Fred Quilley, the mournful little jockey with the drooping face who looked after the Maplin's horses and could not look after himself. His name was Felix Bowness, and he appeared in all 58 episodes of Heide-Hi. He is one of the reasons this cast is far stranger and far richer than the programme ever let on, and he is not the only one. The chalet maid you remember best, the one in the enormous glasses who only ever wanted to be a yellowcoat, once stood on a talent show on national television and came second to a singing dog. And 11 years later she had a record at number 2 in the British charts. The entertainment's host in the loud jacket, the one who could work a room in his sleep, was a coal miner in South Yorkshire, until the day he slipped on a bar of soap in the Pithead Baths and never went underground again. And the flustered, decent professor who ran the whole camp married the daughter of the man who created the show, then died at 45 at the height of everything. Heide-Hi ran on BBC One from a pilot on New Year's Day 1980 through to the last episode on the 30th of January 1988. 9 series and 58 episodes in all. It was written by Jimmy Perry and David Croft, the two men who had already given the country Dad's Army, and it was set at the fictional Maplin's holiday camp at Crimpton-on-Sea in Essex during the summer seasons of 1959 and 1960. Perry knew exactly what he was writing about because he had genuinely been a Butlin's Redcoat himself. The camp you saw on screen was real too, Warner's old holiday camp at Dovercourt near Harwich, standing in for Maplin's. In 1984, it won the BAFTA for Best Comedy Series, and for the best part of a decade, the whole country knew that when somebody shouted "Hi-de-hi" at you, you were expected to shout "Ho-de-ho" straight back. 9 of those faces are worth your time this evening. Some of their lives were far harder than the sunshine and the knobbly knees competitions ever suggested, and 1 or 2 of them are still going strong. Let me take you through them properly, one at a time. So let's begin with the face on the front of it all. Peggy Ollerenshaw, chalet maid, and the most hopeful person ever to hold a mop. You remember her instantly. The glasses, the pinny, the voice that came out of her like a kettle boiling over, and that terrible, wonderful, unshakable belief that this year, Mr. Fairbrother would finally let her be a yellowcoat. Peggy was the heart of Heide-Hi, precisely because she was at the bottom of it. Everybody else at Maplin's had at least got a foot inside show business. Peggy was scrubbing the chalets and dreaming of it through a window, and every single one of us watching knew exactly what that felt like. Sue Pollard was born Susan Georgina Pollard on the 7th of November 1949 in Nottingham to Don and Hilda Pollard. She has said the whole thing started when she was 6 years old and played an angel in the school nativity play. And if you have ever seen her on stage, you will believe it. She went to Berridge Road School and then Peveril Bilateral School, and she left at 16 to become a shorthand typist at the Tennant Rubber Company in Carlton, typing invoices by day, singing in working men's clubs and charity shows at night. Here is the moment that changed it. In 1974, she went on Opportunity Knocks, the big talent show of the day, the one that made careers overnight. She sang her heart out in front of the nation, and she came second to a singing Jack Russell. A dog beat her. She has told that story on chat shows for 50 years since, and she tells it with absolute delight because a girl who can lose to a terrier on live television and carry on is a girl nothing is ever going to stop. She carried on. There was Godspell, and there was a touring production of Grease in which one of the other young hopefuls in the company was a girl called Tracy Ullman. Then, in 1979, Jimmy Perry and David Croft were casting a new comedy about a holiday camp, and Sue Pollard walked in, and Peggy Ollerenshaw arrived in British living rooms in 1980 and stayed for 8 years. What people forget is what she did while the series was still running. In 1986, she released a single called Starting Together. the theme to a BBC documentary series called The Marriage, and it went to number 2 in the UK charts. Not a novelty hit shouted in a Peggy voice either. A straight, sincere ballad sung properly at number 2 in the country by the woman you thought of as a chalet maid. That record put her in the top 3 of the national charts while she was still mopping floors at Maplin's on a Friday night. She married Peter Keogh in 1984 during the Hyder-High years. They divorced in 1992. She has never remarried, and she has talked about that openly and cheerfully in the years since, which is very much her way. She wrote a memoir called Hearts and Showers. She is a lifelong Nottingham Forest supporter, and if you ever want to see her go quiet with feeling, ask her about Forest rather than about show business. Her career simply did not stop when Maplin's closed. She went straight into You Rang, My Lord, with the same team from 1988 to 1993, and then Oh, Dr. Beeching from 1995 to 1997. She has led Annie and Sweet Charity on stage, and she has now done more than 40 pantomimes. She is one of the great wicked queens of the British Christmas, and there are children who met her as the villain in Snow White who are parents themselves now. And what is she doing today? Working, of course. In September 2024, she launched a one-woman show called Sue Pollard, still fully charged, celebrating 50 years in the business. Songs, stories, and the characters people still shout at her in the street. That tour ran until November 2025 and played 81 theatres up and down the country. 81. At an age when most people have long stopped, she was doing a different town every couple of nights, and since the tour ended she has been taking the show abroad, playing cruise ships and dates in mainland Europe. She turned 77 this November. 50 years on from losing to a dog on television, Sue Pollard is still the one they come to see, and she still walks out at the end to shake hands with the people in the front row. Second then, the man in the appalling jacket with the microphone in his hand. Ted Bovis is the sort of character British comedy does better than anyone. The camp's entertainment's host, the comper, the fixer, always working an angle, always half a step from being found out, and underneath it all, a genuine professional who could hold a ballroom full of restless holidaymakers in the palm of his hand. The reason Ted Bovis is so convincing is embarrassingly simple. Paul Shane had done that job for real in rooms far tougher than Maplin's. He was born George Frederick Spite on the 19th of June 1940 in Thryburgh, just outside Rotherham in the West Riding of Yorkshire. He left school in 1955 at 15 and went down the pit, a miner at Silverwood Colliery in the coalfields his family came from. Then in 1967 he slipped on a bar of soap in the pithead baths and did such damage to his back, 2 herniated discs, that he could not go back underground. He came out of the pit on a pension in his 20s with a bad back and no obvious future. It is one of the great accidents of British comedy. Without that bar of soap, there is no Ted Bovis. He already had a second life to fall back on, because he had spent 10 years as a part-time entertainer around the pubs and clubs of South Yorkshire. His very first public performance had been as a singer at the Grafton pub in Rotherham. He was a singer first, and he became a comedian slowly, almost by accident, by making the songs funny, the sort of apprenticeship you cannot buy, served in front of audiences who had come out for a pint and had to be won round from nothing. Through the 1970s, he picked up small television parts, and then in May 1979 came the piece of luck that made him. Jimmy Perry happened to be watching Coronation Street, where Paul Shane was playing a character called Frank Roper, and something about him was exactly right. Perry cast him as Ted Bovis, and within a year he was one of the best-known faces in the country. That is not all. It is Paul Shane's voice you hear on the theme tune, singing Holiday Rock alongside Ken Barry at the top of every episode. He stayed with Perry and Croft for the rest of his career. He was Alf Stokes, the scheming footman, in You Rang, My Lord, from 1988 to 1993, and Jack Skinner in Oh, Dr. Beeching, between 1995 and 1997. In 1991, he was given his own series, Very Big, Very Soon. In later years, he turned up in Holby City and Emmerdale, and he never lost his taste for live work. On the 1st of April 1984, he was inducted into the Grand Order of Water Rats, the old show business fraternity, the kind of honour that means far more to a club comedian than any award from a television company, because it comes from the profession itself. He married Dorothy Short in 1961 when he was still a minor, and they had 3 daughters. Dorothy died on the 4th of April 2001, aged 58, and friends said he was never entirely the same afterwards. His own health began to fail in the last years. In May 2009, he had heart surgery at the Northern General Hospital in Sheffield and made a full recovery, going back to work as though nothing had happened. After a later illness, he died on the 16th of May 2013 in a hospice in Rotherham, aged 72. His funeral was held on the 31st of May at Rotherham Minster, in the town he had never really left. A boy from Thryburg who went down the pit at 15 ended up singing the theme tune to one of the best-loved comedies this country ever made. And he did it without ever pretending to be anything other than a Yorkshireman. Third on our list is the voice that woke the entire camp up. Hello, campers! Nobody in Britain hears those two words in any voice but hers. Gladys Pugh, Welsh, brisk, immaculate, sports organiser and chief announcer, in love with Mr. Fairbrother and never remotely close to saying so, and quietly ruling Maplins from behind a microphone. It is a beautifully judged performance because Gladys is funny and dignified at the same time, and you never once laugh at her. Ruth Madoc was born. Margaret Ruth Llewellyn Baker on the 16th of April 1943 in Norwich, of all places, to parents whose work in nursing and healthcare administration took them travelling. She was brought up in Swansea by her Welsh grandmother, and that is where the voice comes from. The accent that became one of the most recognisable sounds on British television belonged to a woman born in Norfolk. She trained at RADA, and long before Maplins she had done work you may not realise you have seen. She was Fruma Sarah in the 1971 film of Fiddler on the Roof, the ghost who rises up in the dream sequence and terrifies the entire village. That same year she appeared in Under Milk Wood, the film of Dylan Thomas's play. She was, in other words, a serious, classically trained actress and singer before she ever picked up a Tannoy microphone. Gladys Pugh brought her a BAFTA nomination and 8 years of national recognition, and unlike some of her colleagues, she never resented being known for it. She understood exactly what the part had given her, and she went on working for another 34 years. She appeared in Little Britain in 2005 for a whole new generation who had no idea what Maplins was. In 2007, she won the reality series I'm Famous and Frightened at 64 years of age. She toured in Calendar Girls the Musical in 2019, and she was a fixture of the pantomime circuit every winter for decades. There is a lovely surprise in her family history too. In 2010, she took part in genealogical research and discovered that she was a distant cousin of David Lloyd George, the Welsh Prime Minister who led Britain through the end of the First World War. The most famous Welsh voice on television turned out to be related to the most famous Welsh voice in Parliament. Her private life had 2 long chapters. She married the actor Philip Madoc in 1961 and kept his name for the rest of her life. They had 2 children and divorced in 1981. In 1982, she married John Jackson, and that marriage lasted until his death in 2021, which left her badly shaken. She was working right to the end, and that is the part that hurts. She had already broken a hip once in a fall while rehearsing for Calendar Girls, and had fought her way back onto the stage afterwards. In December 2022, she was booked to appear in Aladdin at the Princess Theatre in Torquay, the Christmas run, her favourite kind of work, when she had another fall and had to withdraw from the show. She underwent surgery, and on the 9th of December 2022, she died, aged 79. She had a beautiful singing voice. She was generous to every young performer who ever shared a dressing room with her, and 46 years after she first said it, half this country still cannot say the word campers without smiling. Before we go on, I would like to hear from you. Not about the sad parts, about the good ones. Do you remember watching Heidi High on a Sunday evening, and who was in the room with you? Did you ever go to a holiday camp yourself at Butlin's or Warner's or Pontin's and stay in one of those chalets with the little hooks by the door? Tell me in the comments below what you remember. The ballroom, the tannoy, the knobbly knees competition, the redcoat who was nice to you when you were small. I read them all, and the memories people leave under these videos are very often better than the programmes themselves. Which brings us forth to the gentlest man at Maplins, and the saddest story of the 9. Professor Jeffrey Fairbrother is a wonderful comic invention, an archaeologist from Cambridge who has thrown up a university career to run a holiday camp, standing in his sensible jacket amid the sequins and the loudspeakers, hopelessly out of his depth and far too polite to say so. Simon Cadell played him with such precision that you forgave the character everything. The performance looks effortless, and it was not. It came from one of the most thoroughly trained actors on British television. He was born on the 19th of July 1950 in London, into a theatrical family on every side. His father, John Cadell, was a leading theatrical agent. His grandmother was Jean Cadell, the distinguished Scottish character actress, and his great-uncle was the painter Francis Cadell. His sister is the actress Selina Cadell. His cousin is Guy Siner, who, if you watched our last few films, you will know instantly as Lieutenant Gruber in Allo Allo. He was educated at Bedales in Petersfield, where one of his school friends was a young Giles Brandreth, then joined the National Youth Theatre and trained at Bristol Old Vic Theatre School. And that is the thing about Simon Cadell that people miss. Hi-de-hi made him famous, but the theatre was always his real home. He was a superb, exact, technical comic actor on stage, and he had a marvellous voice. He was Blackberry in the 1978 animated film of Watership Down, and he played Celeborn, the Elven King, in the BBC's great radio adaptation of The Lord of the Rings in 1981, which is why he did what a lot of actors talk about doing, and very few actually do. In 1984, after 5 series with Hi-de-hi, at the peak of its popularity and the part that had made his name secure for as long as he wanted it, he walked away. He knew precisely what happens to an actor who stays in one beloved character too long, and he went back to the stage. He was later Dundridge in Blot on the Landscape in 1985, and he led the comedy Life Without George from 1987. Maplin's needed a new man at the top, and the job went to David Griffin as squadron leader Clive Dempster, the dashing former RAF pilot, who arrived in 1984 and stayed for 24 episodes to the end of the run. Griffin went on to become Emmett in Keeping Up Appearances, the long-suffering neighbour Hyacinth Bucket pursued for 37 episodes and later toured internationally on stage alongside Sue Pollard. He was born on the 19th of July 1943 in Richmond, Surrey, the very same day of the year as the man he replaced 7 years earlier. He is 83 and he is still with us. Now, the surprise in Simon Cadell's story. In 1986, 2 years after leaving the series, he married the actress Rebecca Croft, the daughter of David Croft, the man who created and produced the show. They had 2 sons. The gentle professor married into the family that had invented him. He was a heavy smoker, up to 80 cigarettes a day, and it caught up with him early. In January 1993, after a performance with Joanna Lumley, he suffered a near-fatal heart attack. He had triple bypass surgery and was back at work within 4 months, which tells you everything about how he regarded his profession. Then in September 1993, while he was being treated for pneumonia, doctors found lymphoma. He fought it for 2.5 years, and he kept working when he could. He died in London on the 6th of March 1996, aged just 45. He is buried in the churchyard of All Saints at Honington in Suffolk. 45 is no age at all, and the loss of what he would have done in the next 30 years is real. But watch him again in that first series. The flinch, the courtesy, the beautiful timing. And you are watching an actor at the very top of his craft, preserved exactly as he was. At 30, Number 5 wore a bow tie and held himself like a man who had been badly let down by the modern world. Barry Stewart Hargreaves, the camp's ballroom dancing instructor, is one of the great small creations of British sitcom. Snobbish, wounded, sniffy about the standard of everything, and locked in a marriage that had plainly stopped being a marriage some years earlier. Barry Howard played him with a wonderful stillness. He got laughs by doing almost nothing at all, which is the hardest way there is. He was born Barry Frederick Howard on the 9th of July 1937 in Nottingham, the same city, as it happens, that gave us Sue Pollard. He did his national service in the Royal Navy, and then came the detail that tells you what sort of man he was. He wanted to go to drama school and had no money for it, so he went and worked backstage at the Alexandra Theatre in Birmingham for the best part of 2 years, saving up, learning the business from the wings before he ever set foot on a stage himself. Very few people want it that much. He was in the first 7 series of Hi-de-hi, and then left before the end of the run. Away from Maplin's, he became one of the most sought-after pantomime performers in the country, and he was particularly celebrated as an ugly sister in Cinderella, opposite John Inman, 2 of the finest farceurs of the era in the same pair of frocks, which by all accounts was worth the ticket on its own. He also appeared in Terry and June, in You Rang, My Lord, in the sitcom Dad, and in Doctor Who. He never really retired. He turned up on BBC Radio 4 in Fags, Mags and Bags in 2012, and he was still doing voice work for the children's series Mr. Snufflesworth as late as 2015. Barry Howard died of blood cancer on the 28th of April 2016 at his home in Poole in Dorset, aged 78. He had spent nearly 60 years making people laugh, most of it standing perfectly still with one eyebrow raised, and there are actors half his age who would give anything to be that good at it. Sixth, and inseparable from him on screen, is his dancing partner and long-suffering wife. Yvonne Stewart Hargreaves is grandeur in a leotard, the finest ballroom dancer at Maplin's in her own estimation, quietly furious about her circumstances, and married to a man who cannot bear her. Diane Holland played her with an unimprovable air of wasted refinement. And here is the joke behind the joke. The most thoroughly English snob on 1980s television was Australian. She was born June Diane Neeltje Holland on the 28th of February 1930 in Melbourne and came to England as a child. Her father had been gassed in the First World War, and the family's circumstances when they arrived were not easy. She was a serious dancer, which is the key to the whole performance. She trained at the Cone Ripman School in London, and she became a principal dancer on Sunday night at the London Palladium, the biggest variety show on British television, as well as working the casino circuit in Europe and appearing in the West End from 1949 onwards. She danced with the Royal Ballet at Covent Garden. Television audiences in the 60s knew her as Sarah Maynard in Crossroads, which she played from 1964 to 1970. Her arrival at Maplin's came through the family. Her younger sister Gilda was married to Jimmy Perry, and Perry, having seen Diane on stage locally, knew exactly who should play Yvonne. Then there is the detail that ought to be better known. By the time she was dancing in those ballroom scenes, she had arthritis in her hips, the affliction that eventually finds nearly every professional dancer, and she concealed it completely. Every one of those elegant turns cost her something, and she never let it show for a second. She never married. She lived quietly in Godstone in Surrey, and everyone who worked with her described the same two things: enormous kindness and a very dry sense of humour. She died at home on the 24th of January 2009 from bronchial pneumonia, aged 78. 60 years of dancing, from the Palladium to a holiday camp ballroom in Essex, and she made every step of it look easy. Seventh brings us right back to where we started this evening, to the little jockey in the riding boots. Fred Quilley, who looked after the Maplin's horses, was the quietest character in the series and one of the funniest. Doleful, put upon, permanently convinced that the world was against him, and with a shady past in racing that was never entirely explained. He is in every single episode, all 58 of them. Felix Talbot Bowness was born on the 30th of March 1922 in Harwell in Berkshire to French-Canadian parents. Before any of the show business, he was a bantamweight boxing champion. That tiny, mournful figure on your screen could genuinely handle himself. Then the war came. He joined the Royal Berkshire Regiment as a signalman, and on D-Day he went in with the Normandy landings. And the craft he was in was hit and sank. He survived, was nursed back to health in a French convent, and while he was recovering, he was taken to a Vera Lynn concert, where she gave him a singing lesson, a small kindness in the middle of a catastrophe that he remembered for the rest of his life. He came home and went into comedy. There were 2 summer seasons on the pier at Clacton-on-Sea in 1948 and 1949. Holiday Camp Country, the very world High de High would later recreate. And then he found the job that made him quietly indispensable to British television. He became a warm-up man. He was the comedian who stood in front of the studio audience before recording began, got them laughing, kept them cheerful through the technical breakdowns, and walked off before the credits rolled. He did it for Morecambe and Wise. He did it for the 2 Ronnies. He did it for Terry Wogan's Chat Show and for This Is Your Life. And in 1985, This Is Your Life turned the tables and made him the subject. Think about that for a moment. Some of the biggest laughs in British comedy history, on the recordings you have watched 100 times, were warmed up by a man who had been pulled out of the sea off Normandy. Perry and Croft, who knew exactly what he was worth, put him in front of the camera as Fred Quilley, and afterwards in You Rang, My Lord. And, oh, Dr. Beeching, as well. He married Mavis Dungy in 1950 and they were together for the rest of his life. He retired from acting in 2003 after being diagnosed with dementia, and he died peacefully at home in Woodley in Berkshire on the 13th of September 2009, aged 87, survived by Mavis, their son, 3 grandchildren and a great-grandchild. If you have ever laughed at a British sitcom audience laughing, some part of that was Felix Bowness's doing, and he never once asked for the credit. By the way, if you are enjoying this, do please subscribe to the channel before you go. There is one more of the Maplin's family still to come, and his is the story that ends this happily. We make a new one of these every week, and I would rather not lose you. The 8th of our 9 hated children and was very open about it. Mr. Partridge, the Punch and Judy man, miserable, hard-drinking, aiming a swazzle at small boys with genuine loathing, is one of the darkest characters ever allowed into a family sitcom, and he is funny precisely because Leslie Dwyer commits to it entirely. There is no wink to the audience. He really cannot stand them. The wonderful irony is the life behind it. Leslie Gilbert Dwyer was born on the 28th of August 1906 in Catford in South London, and he was a show business child from the start. His father was the popular music hall comedian Johnny Dwyer. Leslie was performing on stage from the age of 10, and he made his first film in 1921 when he was 15 years old and the pictures were still silent. By the time he arrived at Maplin's, he had been a working performer for very nearly 60 years, the child of the halls, playing a man who despised children. And what a career it was in between. He was in Which We Serve in 1942 and The Way Ahead in 1944, 2 of the finest British films of the war. He appeared in the 1959 remake of The 39 Steps. In 1953, he was in Act of Love opposite a young and largely unknown Brigitte Bardot. On television, he turned up in Doctor Who, Steptoe and Son, Z-Cars and The Sweeney, more than 60 credited film roles alone, spread across half a century. He died on Boxing Day, the 26th of December 1986, aged 80, of respiratory failure caused by a pulmonary embolism, and he was buried at the East London Cemetery. 65 years in front of a camera, from the silent era to colour television, and the character he is remembered for is a grumpy man with a stripy booth on a windy Essex beach. He would have found that very funny indeed, and that leaves one. The 9th and last, and the reason this ends the way it does. Spike Dixon was the youngest of the Maplin's entertainers, the eager, hopeless junior comic always being talked into something disastrous by Ted Bovis, always turning up the next morning ready to try again. He is the most likeable person in the entire series, and there is a reason for that. Jeffrey Holland is by every account precisely as nice as Spike. He was born Geoffrey Michael Parks on the 17th of July 1946 in Walsall in the West Midlands. His father died when he was 14, and everything changed overnight. He went out to work to help support his mother, first for a wine merchant and then in an office, with the acting kept firmly in the evenings. When he finally joined Equity, the actors' union, there was already a Geoffrey Parks on the books, so he needed a new name and took his grandmother's maiden name instead. That is where Geoffrey Holland comes from. He trained at the Birmingham School of Speech Training and Dramatic Art and made his stage debut in 1967. His first television appearance was a non-speaking part in Crossroads, a man with no lines at all, and his first speaking role came in Dixon of Dock Green in 1974. 6 years after that, he walked into Maplin's, and everything changed again. What he did next is genuinely rare. Very few actors managed all 3 of the great Perry and Croft ensemble comedies of that era. Geoffrey Holland is one of them. He was Spike from 1980 to 1988, then James Twelvetrees, the upright footman, in You Rang, My Lord, from 1988 to 1993, and then Cecil Parkin in Oh, Dr. Beeching, from 1995 to 1997. 17 unbroken years at the centre of British comedy, in 3 different costumes. And then he did something braver. In 2013, he began touring a one-man play he had wanted to do for years. And this is my friend, Mr. Laurel. An hour and a half alone on stage as Stan Laurel in his final years, remembering Oliver Hardy. It is not a comedy turn. It is a serious, tender piece about grief and friendship and the end of a partnership, and audiences come out of it in pieces. He has performed it all over the country, and it is the work he is proudest of. He was also in the stage version of Brassed Off in 2017, and in 2021 he joined a podcast sitcom called Barmy Dale, acting alongside his wife. His personal life is a happy one. He has been married to the actress Judy Buxton since 2004. She is an accomplished actress in her own right, and he has 2 children. In February 2025, he published his memoirs, written with the comedy historian Robert Ross under the perfect title The First Rule of Comedy. Memories and moments. He gives talks, he does theatre, he answers his letters, and he speaks about the people in this story with obvious love. Jeffrey Holland turned 80 on the 17th of July this year, just a fortnight ago as I record this, and he is still working, still touring, still standing on stages up and down the country telling audiences about Stan Laurel and about a holiday camp in Essex that never actually existed. Which is where we came in. A signalman pulled out of the water off Normandy who ended up in riding boots. A miner who slipped on a bar of soap and became a household name. A ballerina hiding her arthritis. A Welsh woman from Norwich. A professor who married the creator's daughter. And a chalet maid who lost to a dog and never stopped. That is the thing about Hi-de-Hi that keeps it warm nearly 40 years later. It was a programme about people at the very bottom of show business, the ones doing the knobbly knees competition in the rain hoping for something better. And it was made by people who had genuinely lived it. Jimmy Perry really had been a Redcoat. Paul Shane really had worked those clubs. Felix Bowness really had stood in front of restless audiences and won them round. None of them were pretending. The camp at Dovercourt has long since gone, and the summer of 1959 was a long time ago. But somewhere tonight a repeat is playing and a tannoy is crackling into life over an empty ballroom, and a Welsh voice is saying good morning to the campers. Give them a shout back. They earned it.